hello. It is wonderful to see you all for the first time here tonight. 4 years ago, as of next week, I told my parents something that changed our relationship forever. After struggling in my skin for years, I finally decided it was time to be honest with those closest to me. At 13 years old, I came out to my parents as transgender. I was born female and began socially transitioning to male at 13, but I've always felt wrong in my body. After years of struggling quietly and feeling broken, finding answers as to why was a massive relief to me. I assumed that would be the same for everyone else too. The reaction was less than ideal. I dealt with intense mental and verbal abuse for 2 days until I left to stay with a friend, and when I returned home, it was just my mom and me for a few weeks. Lots happened, too complex to cover now, and eventually things got better. But my transition has always been a sore spot in my family, even now. A plethora of events in my early teenage years caused disruption that didn't only arise within my family, but also in friendships. Growing up homeschooled, I had few opportunities to make new friends. I had people around me, but were only close due to proximity, not mutual interest. As I grew into adolescence, I started getting set apart. All of a sudden, my friends' parents wouldn't let me spend the night with their kids. I was no longer allowed to comfortably show affection to my friends. And I even got a persuasive religious sit-down from 2 other 11-year-olds about how they didn't want me to go to hell. Coming from a Jewish family that doesn't believe in hell, I didn't understand that that wasn't an okay conversation to be had. I guess y'all just have my best interest in mind. I don't know. Until I told my mom, of course, and I understood the gravity. After dealing with everything that happened and beginning to heal, I eventually found my people, as well as the places where I excelled. And I grew. I walked through the world to the best of my ability, but I was always out of place and isolated. I didn't fit into boy or girl groups, but I always tried relentlessly to mirror mannerisms and actions just to fit in. Because of this, it took a very long time for me to develop proper social skills and my own unique personality. This happened eventually, but it required a lot of practice, and I experienced a lot of inward shame as a child because of this. How other people treated me dictated how I acted for a very long time. I would purposefully make myself small visually and aesthetically, or by restraining myself in conversation. I was being inauthentic, and it was unsustainable. When the pandemic hit, I fell into a deep depression. This was in the previous months, I had spent hundreds of hours working to accomplish 2 things. My second-degree black belt, testing in Taekwondo, and training and competing in the Retired Racehorse Project with my self-trained 3-year-old thoroughbred. I had been achieving the biggest goals I'd ever had, but all of a sudden, our world came to a sliding stop. We can all relate to that feeling now, but at the time, I felt completely alone. This was the darkest time of my entire life. My depression was at its worst, and I didn't believe I would live to see the next year. Nonetheless, I learned to fight for myself. During the next summer, I went on medication for my mental health and began to get better. That's I think when I decided to start being honest with who I am. I started making my own clothes, dyeing my hair more, and stopped hiding my opinions. I've had some nasty interactions because of this, some incredibly positive ones, and some outright confusing ones, but most of all, I've met people asking me questions about my trans identity or why they should even care to learn about such an unfamiliar topic in the first place. Many people in this audience may be asking those same questions. I mean, what are the chances you're even gonna run into somebody who's transgender in the real world? The truth is that you probably know or will know someone who is transgender or non-binary. The Human Rights Campaign estimates that there are more than 2 million trans people in the United States, and according to a study done in May of 2022, more than 4 in 10 American adults know someone who is transgender, and 1 in 5 know someone who is non-binary. But still, in the same study, 60% of Americans believe that gender is the same thing as sex assigned at birth, and 38% believe that society has gone too far in accepting trans individuals. There is real anti-trans genocidal rhetoric circulating parts of the media right now, and we have to collectively stand against it. Trans people are now fighting 8 of the 10 stages of genocide: classification, symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, and persecution. The only stages left are extermination and denial. That's why I'm here, to talk about why disrupting our preconceived notions about gender is something that we must do, and doing so now will make our communities better and save lives. I know, save lives, really? Yes. Yes. According to the Trevor Project's 2022 national survey, transgender and non-binary youth with their names and pronouns respected by the people they lived with attempted suicide at half the rate of those who did not. But only 47% of American adults believe that it's important to use a person's new name if they transition, and 34% believe the same about using someone's new pronouns. Respecting someone's name and pronouns is more than just an act of courtesy. It's suicide prevention. The latest data from the National Transgender Survey in 2015 showed that 39% of transgender individuals experienced serious psychological stress in the past month, compared to 5% of the overall US population. It showed that nearly 1/3 of trans people had experienced homelessness in their lifetime. Half of all trans people had experienced some type of harassment or discrimination, and 1 in 10 had had a family member become violent towards them because of their identity. Queer youth who live somewhere that is openly accepting of the LGBTQ+ community reported significantly lower rates of suicide attempts. Overall, nearly 1 in 5 transgender and non-binary youths in the US attempt suicide, which is 2.5 times the rate of cisgender queer youth. This goes down by nearly 40% with gender-affirming healthcare. It's also important to mention that disproportionate suicide rates affect queer youth of color much more than their white peers. For example, according to the Trevor Project, 49% of Black and 55% of Indigenous queer youth considered suicide in the last year. The Human Rights Campaign has documented at least 302 violent deaths of trans and gender nonconforming people in the US since 2013, when the FBI began tracking hate crimes against transgender people. Although probably an undercount for what went unreported, there were 32 murders of trans people in the United States last year. 81% of those were trans people of color. 81% of those were trans feminine people or trans women, who are usually at a much higher rate of being at a much higher risk of being victims of violence than someone who is trans masculine like myself. These numbers are underrepresented and do not account for the lives lost due to suicide, unreported crimes, and those who are misgendered and dead named at death. This is why we celebrate Transgender Day of Remembrance annually on November 20th. We gather as a community to mourn the losses of our trans siblings who were murdered due to transphobic violence. We hold vigils with speeches, prayers, and other ceremonial acts to celebrate their lives. International Transgender Day of Visibility is our other holiday, celebrated yearly on March 31st. This was created to celebrate trans and gender nonconforming people around the world, to honor the effort and courage it takes to live authentically, as well as to raise awareness of the discrimination and violence we face. This is all about recognizing the joy and resilience of trans people, while still acknowledging the work that needs to be done. All in all, our two holidays were created to say, remember our dead and remember that we exist. Though these holidays and even the term transgender have only become widespread in the last 30 years, people living outside of the gender binary have been around for much longer. Historians have documented evidence of gender variance as far back as 218 CE in Greece, Rome, South Asia, and indigenous communities. In the 19th and 20th centuries, soldiers assigned female at birth would hide and serve in the army as men, with many of them keeping to their male identity after their service. Trans people have always been here. As acceptance for trans people grows, so will the community. We're seeing this, and have seen this exponential growth pattern before, in something as mundane as being left-handed. Up until the mid-20th century in some places, if you were left-handed, you were criminalized. Once that ended, numbers grew for the next 100 years and eventually hit an average. This is not because people started becoming more left-handed or because it was trendy, but because of expanding acceptance and the knowledge that what is unfamiliar will not hurt you. This is the same for trans people. Being trans is just about as contagious as being left-handed is. And the growing number of trans kids are simply because people are less afraid to be transgender. At 17, we are expected to pick a college and a major, a decision that will dictate our futures and could put us into a lifetime of debt. But we are often not allowed the freedom of choice when it comes to our bodies and well-being. Receiving gender-affirming healthcare is a lengthy, in-depth process that comes with the help of multiple psychological and physical doctors. These arguing against this life-saving healthcare are not doctors and do not know a trans person or have their best interest in mind. They are simply people spreading bigoted ideas with no evidence. After many years of self-realization and therapy, I've gotten to the point where I'm confident enough in my knowledge of myself to know the best way to move forward with my life. Once I turn 18, I will be able to begin that process to live more authentically. For me, this will look like starting testosterone as hormone replacement therapy and eventually getting top surgery to have a male chest. Queer people have always been here and always will. So this is my official call to action to you all to advocate for trans liberation. We aren't going away, and we deserve to be seen. We all deserve to live freely and comfortably in our skin. I hope that we can all be brave enough to find who we really are, not just who we're expected to be. That's why I'm here.